Welcome to the Jim Acosta Show. It's another day that ends in Y in the Epstein Gate cover-up. More questions are swirling around Donald Trump and the Epstein files. He's not commenting very much. His Attorney General, Pam Bondi, the disgraceful Attorney General, tried to put out a letter over the weekend saying that all of the files have been released in compliance with the law, but nobody is buying that. Let's talk about this with one of the independent journalists who's been working this story nonstop, Ellie Leonard of Substack fame. Ellie, this is taking way too long for us to do this. Welcome to the program. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I guess I mentioned the letter from the disgraced Pam Bondi, which is what she is. But you know what, and we can show it to the viewers and you know, talk about this, but I mean, nobody's buying this, that all of the documents and the files have been released. I thought there were supposed to be videos. I thought there was supposed to be a bunch of stuff, and it's just not everything.
It's deja vu all over again, because we got, what did we get, the same letter in July saying there's nothing to see here. There are no more documents. This investigation is effectively closed, which they actually did close it on the day that Trump entered office. There was an open investigation that he closed. So the idea that, just kidding, now it's closed, it's ridiculous, because you know, they gave us these documents. They said it was 3.5 million. I don't think anybody's actually counted to make sure it's actually 3.5 million. We don't know how many more documents there are, but we know if you go through and you look at the little file numbers in the list, there's clearly numbers missing because everything's in sequence, and there's many documents that are missing. So this is not it. I don't really know what her intent is anymore, other than to just appease the president. I don't know what she's doing.
Yeah, and there are these documents that have been released as part of the files that show allegations regarding Donald Trump, and there are redactions. And if they're going to say there's nothing going on here, these are not credible, I don't understand the redactions. I mean, we could show some of those. There are some regarding a 13-year-old, I believe, making allegations. And you know, this one in particular gets into some of that. I was just looking at this one the other day. It talks about, you know, allegations that came into the FBI about Trump and Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, discussing how they could, you know, market sex parties and that sort of a thing. And it's just like, I don't know whether this is true. It has not been substantiated. Obviously, he has not admitted to this, but there are all these weird goddamn redactions. So, you know, what do you make of the way it's been redacted and the way it's been released to the public?
You know, I started working on this quite a few months ago, and the idea of there being these like calendar girl parties, or these parties where girls are the entertainment for the men, is not new. There was a party that was recorded, and we have the evidence of it, where Donald Trump hosted it at Mar-a-Lago, and you know, his party planner said, "Okay, what's the guest list? How many people are showing up?" And he goes, "Oh, just one. It's just me and Epstein." And then it was just them sitting back and watching the entertainment. So the idea of this happening is not unlikely. The redactions are just, you know, we clearly know that cruelty is the point, right? They're not redacting the survivors. They are a little bit, but like in such a way that we still know who they are, or we can still see parts of their body. The redactions are all the people sending and receiving the emails. They are the legal teams. They are the perpetrators. They are the financiers. They are Mohammed bin Salman, they are Sultan bin Sulayem. There are all these people who are partying with Epstein, who are exchanging money with Epstein, who are asking for girls of a certain size, shape, color, whatever. Those people are being redacted. But the thing about the DOJ is, you know, you have a certain amount of people whose job it is to redact these documents, and they're overworked, and they have only so much time and so much ability, and so you have all of us out here doing the same thing, and we have probably upwards of 1 million people doing the same thing, and so we're finding a lot of the things that they missed. And you think of the picture of Donald Trump that they found in the drawer with him and all the girls in the bikinis that they quickly pulled from the last drop. That was found by people on this side of the line who are looking through these documents. So I don't think they have the ability to keep up with the amount of like citizen journalism that's going on out here to redact in time for the things that we are finding.
Right. And Ellie, you've been going, I mean, through these almost one by one, which is an impossible task. But I mean, that's why I think of you as a citizen journalist, true, but also an internet sleuth, I think, to some extent. And that's not to minimize what you're doing. We saw that after
Mhm.
January 6th, there were internet sleuths who helped expose the rioters and the insurrection. So I say this with respect, but I think it's very possible that we would not know as much as we know right now had it not been for folks like yourself, people like Julie Brown, people like Tara Palmieri, people who, and lesser known folks who have just been doing the work of the digging. So much of journalism is digging.
Right. And, before I think this last drop, it was a much smaller group. I think of like Aaron Parnas.
And yep.
Some of the people I'm working with is like Zev Shalev and Kate Justice and Lev Parnas. And we were a very small group and we were digging through a lot of files. And I think when you drop 3.5 million files, you have to recognize that you need to delegate, and that you probably will not see every page, and that's okay. And so we put the call out for people to help. And that you didn't have to have any certain qualification. You don't need to have a legal background, or you don't need to have like a computer science background, or you don't need to have anyone at journalism background. But if you have the ability to read and understand what's going on, then you can help dig. And so we pulled the files, we downloaded them into a Dropbox, and we started handing out the link to thousands and thousands of people. And the things that they have come up with are astounding. They are things that are not redacted. They are things that the DOJ missed. They are documents that put people into question. And that's been really, really astounding. And I'm proud of the co-op that's come out of Substack.
Yeah, no question about it. And some major names have fallen as a result of this. People have pulled themselves out of polite society and out of important positions and so on. And so there have been consequences, but there haven't been any consequences for a lot of people in power. There are administration officials who have been named in the Epstein files. This is a list of, I guess they called it prominent names. This was part of, I think, something that the Justice Department put out. And some of this is silly because they talk about all the prominent names who are in there, and Trump is in there. And then they put people like Obama in there. And I'm like,
right.
Just because
Obama is, I can only speak for myself and the documents that I've looked at. Obama is only in there peripherally.
Right.
I think maybe Biden is in there peripherally with people talking about like news articles and things that they've done. Like, and that's a lot of people. So I always tell people, if you find someone in the Epstein files, go see why you found them. Double check. It's not that they did something, but it's just that they're being talked about, because that's completely different. But the idea of there being a consequence because somebody retired early, that doesn't really cut it for me, because they still have $1 million in the bank. They still have a big house. They still are going to go off and live in Hawaii, whatever. That's not going to work for me. I need people to have consequences. I need people who committed crimes to have jail time and show that it doesn't matter how much money and power you have. If you do something wrong, if you harm a child, that there's a consequence for that. And retirement early it doesn't work for me. And I don't think it works for most people.
Right. And I'll point out, I pointed this out on the show the other day. My name appears in the Epstein files. And if you go and look why, there's like 2 references. And it's because Epstein's accountant flagged a video exchange that I had with Stephen Miller to Jeffrey Epstein. Why? I have no idea, but my name is in there.
Right. Right.
And so that's the reason why you might find prominent names in there that are of no consequence as it relates to the entire, thrust of what we're talking about here. But the other thing, Ellie, that I think we should get into, you said you have found some things, discovered some items in the files that are worth flagging, and talk about that with our viewers. And you said that this has been flagged for members of Congress too.
Yes. So, this is, again, something that was brought to me from other Substackers. There was a coded journal that was from about 1999 to 2003. And there have been other journals that are in the Epstein files as well. But this one was very long. It's about 116 pages total, and it's coded. And in it, I believe there are decoded documents that I've found online, but they were all kind of like text threads. And so we went in and decoded this journal so it was visible as the original journal, and we could see what this girl was saying in her diary. And it is very dark. It's talking about some of the things that we thought were conspiracy, with girls giving birth at Zorro, and having their children taken away from them, or having to have forced abortions. There's a lot of that, and it's very credible because this is a girl's diary from 1999. She was not planning on giving this to the FBI when she wrote it, but there's also a really long list of perpetrators in this journal that is not redacted, because I don't think the DOJ is the one that actually decoded it. And it includes a lot of executives from AOL. It includes a lot of lawmakers from the state of Virginia. It includes the typical, like Larry Summer, Leon Black, Alan Dershowitz. Like, it has a lot of the names that are familiar to us, but there are people in sports teams, who were just, and if you search them and start to look it up, you're like, oh, these people all lived in the state of Virginia. This event took place in the state of Virginia. And so we did a lot of research with that. And that was something that we were able to hand off to Jasmine Crockett before she did a skiff and before she went out on the floor and, had our little conversation with Pam Bondi. But that was something that we could physically hand to someone that says, hey, look, here's evidence. This is credible evidence. This is old evidence that they've had for a really long time. And this shows what was going on and who was involved.
And you mentioned Zorro. I think this is something I've been wanting to talk about for days and days. I'm sure on the shows that you do, you talk about this on a regular basis. Talk about the Zorro Ranch. And for my viewers who haven't heard about this is a ranch that Jeffrey Epstein owned in New Mexico. And now New Mexico lawmakers are talking about conducting an investigation because we hear about Epstein's Island, but we don't know that much about this ranch. And apparently some of the same stuff was going on there too.
Yes. Yeah. So Zorro Ranch is in kind of an unincorporated area called Stanley, New Mexico, kind of closer to Santa Fe. It's 8,000 acres. So this is his biggest property, but it has been thoroughly uninvestigated since the very beginning. And when you read through a lot of these FBI emails and legal documents kind of over time and start to put these conversations in order, you hear them saying, oh, let's focus in on the New York house. Let's focus in on Paris. Let's focus in on the island and Palm Beach. You know what? Let's put New Mexico last. Let's not worry about that right now. And there is a connection there that you have to pay attention to. And that is that one of the men named in Virginia Giuffre's book as a perpetrator was Bill Richardson, who was the governor of New Mexico. And I believe he's passed now. I could be wrong about that.
He did pass away, yep.
Okay. So
he was also the UN ambassador at one point too. Yeah.
Yes. And so he was a big factor in that, where, it had to be up to him to give the go-to for that to be investigated and for him to bring in the law enforcement to do it. So of course he's not going to do that. But also it's a really big hotspot that's not talked about for like some of these tech bros and all the people who were heading out to the West Coast to do conferences. They would all stay at Zorro. You had Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, stayed there a lot. You had Elon Musk. You had all these people going to the ranch. And then you have these stories of people like Annie Farmer, who was 16 years old, being abused on the ranch. And now these stories of this girl giving birth and escaping from there in the middle of the night with a trash bag, right? This has never been investigated. Even with Annie's journals from the 90s that were submitted with their FBI report, this was never investigated. And so now they are finally doing it. Now we just discovered the actual true owner, whose son happens to work in the White House. So now they're going to investigate it, but it's been 30 years. There will be things that disappeared that could have been investigated a very long time ago.
Right. And when you mentioned the person connected to the White House, there's somebody who's running for comptroller of Texas, if I'm not mistaken, who he's the owner of the land. Is that?
Yes, he's the owner of the property.
In recent days, and he's running for comptroller of Texas. So when people talk, I believe, was it Tallarico or was it John Ossoff who talked about the Epstein class? That may have been Ossoff.
Yeah.
There really is an Epstein class in this country, and that's what's being exposed in this. And it's not Democrat or Republican. There's a lot more Republican than Donald Trump would like to admit, but it's an elite class of people who thought they were unaccountable and that they could do these terrible, awful things without getting caught.
Right. And again, that is something, because I have family members who are MAGA and support Donald Trump. And that is what I tell them is, like, if you're going to investigate this too, pay attention to the things that tell you that there are people on all sides of the aisle, because that's how this works. It is not one side or the other committing these crimes. It's the wealth gap. It's the uber wealthy, the 100 millionaires and up, and the rest of us on the other side, right? So, and the only reason, if there is a reason, the only reason why you might see more Republicans is just because when you have hundreds of millions of dollars, the Republican Party often benefits you financially more than the Democratic Party is. So like you may see people in that wealth gap who are more often Republican, and that's really the only reason why.
Yeah. And what is the thing that has surprised you the most in the work that you've done going through all of this? I mean, I guess the thing that has surprised me, because I remember covering Donald Trump during the first administration when he was asked about Ghislaine Maxwell, and he infamously said, "I wish her well." You know, this was a story that folks in mainstream media, legacy media, they were sort of aware of. They knew it was out there. They saw Julie Brown's amazing investigative reporting, award-winning reporting, and so on. I thought, that's interesting. Wondered why Alex Acosta, as I like to say, no relation, was made the labor secretary under Donald Trump when he had cut the sweetheart deal for Jeffrey Epstein and so on. But to me, the thing that is astounding to me is how deep this goes, how far this goes, the number of people involved, the number of just very rich and powerful people around the world who are involved in this. What has surprised you? Is there something that surprises you?
Yeah.
That you say, this is the thing that really surprised
me? I think along the same lines, you start to look at some of the how the abuse of these girls was sort of secondary or like a symptom of a bigger story that had to do with a lot of money and like global finance and power, and how that may have actually affected like things like the 2008 financial crash, and that there's a big story into JP Morgan and some of the things that were going on there that is now coming to light that are pretty shocking about, standards of our banking institutions. Just every day we discover that this web gets bigger. There are more people involved. It is more global. It feeds so much into Washington, which I don't think I knew at the beginning how much it had to do with the actual politics of our country. And, that Jeffrey Epstein is meeting with people at the Treasury and making decisions. And he's this guy with no college degree. But on the flip side of that, I think what's really surprised me in a pleasant way is how willing people are to come together and help. And especially on Substack, like there isn't really a separation between people who've been doing this as their career for decades versus people who just got here. Everybody really seems to kind of step together as a team and work together. And there is no separation between qualifications or expertise or like people who are more well-known versus people who nobody knows. Like it just doesn't seem to matter here. And all of a sudden we're working together as this giant team and really doing the DOJ's job, which is what Julie K. Brown was doing before all of this. And we have to give her credit, because we wouldn't even be talking about this if she hadn't done her investigation. The only reason they reopened the investigation and arrested Epstein was because of her journalism.
Right. And she just recently put out a Substack in the last day or two that talks about some of these big questions that are swirling around Donald Trump. Every time he gets asked about this, he flips out, goes crazy, insults reporters, and so on. And I always that always told me when I was covering him closely day to day that there's something going on, that there's a there. I mean, it makes you want to ask more questions. And Julie and others have flagged these documents. I think it has some yellow. I think we might even have some of the documents here that show some yellow highlighting and some black redactions. And they talk about these allegations involving very young girls. And I mean, what do you make of the Trump question in all of this, Ellie? You mentioned that you have relatives and so on who are MAGA and all of that.
Right.
I mean, these are some very serious allegations. And I don't believe Donald Trump has been directly asked about this.
We're just avoiding it. We're avoiding it. His administration is avoiding it. The only reason we're seeing any of this is because the American public is screaming. They don't want to prosecute him. They don't want to find something. They're going to do as much as they can to avoid doing that. I had the benefit of, before all this happened, I own a small business. I'm a transcriber, and so I worked on a lot of projects that had to do with like Me Too and Harvey Weinstein and other things. I worked with Megan Twohey and Jodi Cantor on their book. And so I actually heard a lot of interviews off the record with people who weren't willing to come forward talking about Trump's abuses for years. And this is before he was running for president. This was back when he was just Donald Trump, who we knew in New York City. Right. And so I've known these things about him for a long time. And I wondered that back then. And then when he ran for president, I begged people not to vote for him because I said, these are the things that I'm hearing. But I think there's this, it's a big lesson in psychology. I imagine there's going to be a lot of like textbooks written about this period of history and how convincible people are. But then also when you start to realize maybe you are wrong, how strong pride is and being able to give up the thing you have soldiered for. I think people really struggle with that. And you think about like this idea of QAnon and fighting against these cabal of sex trafficking, demons, whatever. Well, here it is. We're handing it to you. We're handing you the court documents and the evidence. And so why now do you say, yeah, but not that, right? Like, what is that? What is the psychology behind that? And it's really complicated and it's upsetting because you see people that are smart and that have good hearts, and you see them falling into that abyss.
Yeah, and there's a subscriber comment right now. Why has legacy media not covered this as much as independent media when they have the budgets and the expertise? And I totally agree. This should have been James Patterson, the famous author who has done documentaries on this stuff. He has said the same thing recently. He has said that, he brought a lot of this information to all the networks. Not to me. I didn't see any of this stuff. I mean, I covered it when I was tasked to cover it, and I covered it even when I wasn't tasked to cover it. But these big networks, these big news organizations, they whiffed. They totally whiffed on the and in the defense of the networks and the news organization, there was a lot of coverage of the sexual assault allegations and Access Hollywood. We did that. We did that nonstop when that happened. But Epstein just managed to, that whole story managed to evade really serious scrutiny, it seems to me. And it's bad. It's really bad.
Well, I mean, you just wonder how did that guy miss the sideswipe of Me Too? Of all people, how did he miss Me Too? And it is very interesting. I have seen a lot of the legacy media down to the newspapers, you think about Colbert on last night not being able to interview Tallarico, like this catering to the administration and what power there is behind that. Because like if you think of if one stepped out of line and decided to do the right thing, they would have the most massive audience ever. But like what holds them to that? What holds them to continuing to absolutely cater? And I separate the journalists from the administrative, the C-suites at these places, because I've worked with a lot of journalists at the New York Times. I've worked with a lot of journalists at a lot of newspapers. And I know that they're hardworking and I know that they have opinions that they're not allowed to share. And I know they don't get paid enough and they sleep with their cell phones. Like I know all that. So I don't blame them, but I know that the people at the top absolutely control everything that happens in their day-to-day and they're not allowed to write the story.
You're absolutely right. That is exactly what happens. And you've had a lot of cowardly behavior on the part of a lot of media executives over the last 10 or 12 years, and it's getting worse. And that is why we rely on independent media now. And I give this speech all the time on my show. This is a natural reaction to the cowardice and the failures of the major news organization, of the corporate and legacy media in this country. Well, you and I wouldn't be doing this. Substack wouldn't be blowing up the way it is. YouTube wouldn't be blowing up the way it is if it were not for these failures. I mean, it's just, and it's just going to continue to grow, it seems to me.
Yeah, we're not going to get quieter. We're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere. Well, Ellie, great to talk to you finally. I'm so glad we finally did this. I'll make sure you have all of my information, and so that way we're not using little, DM chat things that don't always work. But please feel free to flag me anytime when something comes up, because this is so damn important that we just got to stay on it, and would love to have you back.
Right. And I think I will see you all probably on the 24th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
In DC. Yeah.
At Miles's big event, the